Joined by Sourabh Gupta, who specializes in Asia-Pacific international relations. Why don't you frame things for us? I mean, because we're looking at an interesting dynamic, and I'd like you to talk about this broadly. We're just about ready to take some pictures of the event that's taking place. Just from the sense of the TPP, its collapse, you've got a new president in place, Donald Trump here in the United States. So much written and talked about, his phone call with Malcolm Turnbull, which many are saying did not go well, although, you know, there's been a lot of, well, maybe that wasn't the case. And then you've got Premier Lee there, and you've got this vacuum, and China seems to be moving right in there. Talk to me about that.
I'll even add to that about President Xi Jinping going to Davos and going to Switzerland and talking about an open international system and a liberal international trading order. It's very interesting because more than most countries, Australia is very vested in an open international economic system. It fought hard for that, and it was looking forward to the TPP. In fact, some of the toughest negotiations in TPP came down to the US and Australians on issues like biologics and intellectual property, on access for sugar in the American market. And they were very disappointed at that outcome. Australia, from taking a larger perspective out here, has been a beneficiary of the international trading system, just as has been China, and is very fearful that if that system collapses into a bloc-like fashion, the next questions that will be asked of them is, so on which side are your security chips placed? It does not want to have that decision of having China as its biggest economic partner and the US as its security guarantor, and the two at odds with each other. So in this context, Australians are obviously very anxious, and the Chinese also too, because China is still a developing country, and it sees a huge potential for growth in that liberal international trading order. And so it also, President Lee and Prime Minister Turnbull's interests coincide very, very directly out here.
It's interesting, Donald Trump on the campaign trail before he was elected said a lot about make America great again, kind of hearkening back to another era. And you see this different message coming from China. We saw it again this week with President Xi talking to Prime Minister Netanyahu about innovation. Innovation going to be a key component in the discussions between Malcolm Turnbull and Premier Lee. We heard it so much in Hangzhou during the G20. Innovation, innovation. It seems as though China going in this direction while the U.S. going in another direction. Talk to me about the sea change that we're witnessing.
Yes, it is. It is a little unfortunate that we have President Trump saying the things that he has said, and even just last week, the Treasury Secretary unable to commit the U.S. in the G20 finance ministers' official statement to an anti-protectionism pledge. They had to remove it from that language because the U.S. is still getting its policy on that in that regard. It's unfortunate, and it's ironic. The U.S. is the one which laid down the liberal international trading system in which so many countries have benefited, including China. And we even have the irony that now that even countries like Japan is viewed as one of the most pro-trade countries and being capable of leading the international trading order. It's negotiating with the EU on an FTA, while the US, which had put this order together, is grappling with how to deal with it. And I think there's obviously huge opportunities in it, but I think what is lacking at the US end is a lack of confidence in engaging with that order. And unfortunately, President Trump is playing to that underconfidence rather than the US strengths and capabilities, where it can benefit enormously from that system which it created.
Let's talk about the capabilities of China. One Belt, One Road came up in discussions with Israel. It's going to come up as well with Australia. Talk to me about where we're at in terms of relations between Australia and China, and what are the chances that can be built on in a much larger degree?
It's a really interesting question, and let me point out two fair points which will be at some degree at contradistinction with each other. First, I talked of the liberal international trading order and the trading system. If that is to be entrenched and deepened in the Asia-Pacific region, given the failure of TPP or the US opting out of TPP and TPP not coming through, the RCEP negotiations need to succeed, and the One Belt and One Road initiative also needs to succeed. Australians have their own infrastructure development plans, and I think the effort is to see if there could be some linkages between the two and some complementarities between the two. So both countries are moving out on that front. But at the same time, let me point the other point out, and that is the Chinese have made huge purchases in Australia, some of which have been controversial and some of which have been blocked, as the correspondent said, which have been in the state electricity energy grid. It has been the world's largest cattle farm. And some of them have been controversial to the US purchase, the Chinese purchase of the port of Darwin, which is next to this thing. And so infrastructure itself and these large purchases can be controversial also and be a point of friction. And it's interesting from the perspective that the US and Australians have these same apprehensions, and yet the Australians persevere through these apprehensions and try to keep the system open so that it can be a win-win process, while unfortunately at the American end right now with President Trump in looking at from glass half empty and seeing how America is hurt from that process. So there's that irony out there, and I hope parties can all come together in favor of openness rather than pushing other countries.
And Premier Lee, not just visiting Australia, also going to New Zealand, both of them, as you are well aware, involved in the TPP, it collapses. What does a victory look like after this trip? I mean, what does success look like for Australia, for New Zealand, and for China?
Success would look like the senior leaders in all these countries resoundingly coming forward to support the cause of a free international trading order, a free international economic and investment system, and also coming together in trying to grapple with those difficulties that they have in certain areas of their strategic relations, things like South China Sea, etc. Australia is very dependent on the US security alliance, and yet it hasn't had an independent posture on the South China Sea, which has been appreciated by the Australians, by the Chinese. But at the same time, the Australians also have requested China that if they could go ahead with the code of conduct this year with the other ASEAN countries, bring it to a finality, and see if aspects of that arbitration case, which the award was against China, aspects of that could be mainstreamed within the code of conduct. So these are heavy asks of the Chinese also. And the point is to see that senior leaders are on the same page calling for an open system and for that liberal international order to be deepened. I think that is the most important thing coming up.